for that, and they didn't do one. And I was like, I'm out. So I woke up this morning and CNN and has been on, and BBC World News America has been on, and PBS World News has been on. So I've been going back and forth between several different things. I think that it still looks really tight, but a lot of it has to do with where votes have been counted and where they haven't. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, right now, President Trump is leading, but they haven't counted the absentee ballots, and there's 1.4 million of them. And so that means that it is likely, or it's possible, right? Not necessarily likely, but possible that Vice President Biden is going to move ahead there. And then also, when we talk about Michigan and Wisconsin, they've just been voting all night. I mean, not voting, counting all night. And so a lot of those are absentee. Those were three places where they could not, and we talked about this on Monday, they could not by law start counting until Election Day, those absentee ballots. And so urban centers are problems. Georgia's looking strange, actually, unexpected. Currently, President Trump is ahead there, but there's urban centers where they had some real problems with the voting machines, and so they're having to count those by hand, or actually put them in new machines is what they're doing. And so that's a place where Vice President Biden would do better than President Trump, or it would be expected that he would. So it's tight. I think that if I was in President Biden's campaign right now, I would probably be feeling better than if I was in President Trump's campaign right now. That's the way that I would look at those numbers. Somebody asked me how I felt about, we'll call it President Trump's tweet last night. And you know, it's obviously incorrect, right? I mean, they always count as long as the ballots were cast on time. You have to count the ballots, right? And so, for example, according to his logic, then he would have actually lost a couple of states last year that or 4 years ago that he won, because they counted after hours. So, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. Noah asked, is there a good reason why they don't start counting absentee ballots, or is it just a stupid law? It's just a stupid law. Okay. And so in Oklahoma, actually in a lot of states, they would say 0 precincts reporting, and we're predicting for President Trump, right? Or we're predicting for Vice President Biden. And they would do that with 0 precincts because the absentee ballots had already been counted, because they were counted as they came in, and they were a significant number of votes, and so they could do that.
Yeah, Abby Broyles yesterday sent out a tweet blasting the Associated Press for calling it Inhofe the winner like 2 minutes after the election ended, because there was no precincts reported. What is interesting, the U.S. House, you know, the Democrats lost 7 incumbents last night and were unable to upset any Republicans. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it got a little bit tighter in the House, but Democrats still retain the majority. They had a really big lead after 2018, because they had it. And remember, in midterms, what do we know about midterm elections?
Exam question.
Come on. What is it?
Incumbents always lose seats, or almost always.
The presidential party almost always loses seats. And so 2018 was one of those years where that was a really big example, okay? And so a lot of those districts sort of corrected. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, what? Okay, I lost you. Okay, so the 100,000 votes that came in from Michigan and Wisconsin that went to Biden overnight they all came from absentee ballots. That's what I'm saying. There's 1.4 million votes that had not been counted just in Pennsylvania. right? So they could not start counting. They could not start counting until then. And that's why, because they were counting them all night long. People are, you know, they've been showing that basically people are counting. Then, you know, they stopped counting at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They started counting again this morning. They're going to count until midnight. Right now, for example, the Michigan Secretary of State was just on saying, hey, our plan is to have these all counted by tonight, but we are guaranteeing Friday. So, I mean, it's just that there's a lot, and their law basically says, because they've never used mail-in ballots before, and to get an absentee ballot, you had to show disability or that you were traveling, okay? And so this is the first time, because of the coronavirus, that they have allowed, and in Oklahoma too, actually, that's true, but Oklahoma has always allowed, as soon as ballots came in, that they could be counted. So all the early voting in Oklahoma that happened, they counted those ballots, but they didn't count any of the early voting in Wisconsin. They didn't count any of the early voting in Michigan. They didn't count any of the early voting in Pennsylvania. And so they could not count them until Election Day. And that made a really big difference. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So I did want to say to you, it is not over. But it looks better for Vice President Biden than it does for President Trump. If I was in the Biden campaign, I would be a little bit more optimistic than I would be if I was in the Trump campaign right now. I want to remind you of two things, right? One, the immigration piece that is in the modules for this week, which is week 11, which have been corrected, and Eric's were stuck into week 10 where they were supposed to go. So be sure to read that immigration piece, because it's going to help you with your workbook. It's going to help you kind of, you're like, I don't even know what this means. When you're looking at the different bills, if you read that first, it's a lot easier. Okay. So it gives you some information. You can say, oh yeah, okay, I want to start with this bill. This is what I'm more interested in. And then when you get to class and you're working in committee on Friday, then there's that. They counted all night, Jared, like I said earlier, I guess you weren't listening. They counted all night in Michigan, and they were going to have a press briefing at 3 a.m. and at 6 a.m. They did not have the 3 a.m. They had the 6 a.m. from what they had counted. Remember that they did not count any early ballots in Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania until yesterday. That's when they started counting. And so, for example, right now in Pennsylvania, there are 1.4 million votes that have not been counted yet. And so a lot of that happens because there is, when we talk about the safest way to vote, mail-in voting is the safest way to vote. And it's more verified than any other way. You have to have the same signature, but it takes a lot longer because they verify it. When you walk in and vote, they do not look at it the same way. It is much more open to fraud than is mail-in voting. All right. So I myself, for example, I got an absentee ballot, and I actually had absentee ballots for years because I was traveling around the world in Oklahoma. I got an absentee ballot this year because of coronavirus, and that I did not want to stand in line and things like that for hours at a time. And so I got an absentee ballot, and I took it in early to the county election board. And even though I had it, you know, a verified picture of my ID on it, even though I had signatures on the inside, even though I actually got it notarized too, just to double it, because why not? Which you did not have to do this year. I took it in, and I still had to show my ID and sign a log whenever I took it into county election. All right. They're much more secure than voting in person. Okay. So those ballots, however, because of all the verification that it requires, because they require so many verifications, take a lot longer to count than those when you go in, you show your ID, sign your name, and go vote, and then stick your ballot in yourself. Okay, much less verification. Okay, other people are doing that instead. Does that make sense? Because now people are going through and they're comparing signatures, and they're saying, yes, okay, this is valid, and then they're counting it. And so, for example, someone was, I think it was actually in Georgia, they were estimating that they could have no more people have voted in Wisconsin than are registered. Whoever is saying that is crazy. That is absolutely not true. Please do not listen to conspiracy theories. In Georgia, they thought that they would be able to process 30,000 votes an hour, okay? And they were able to process 10,000 votes an hour. It just takes a lot longer because of the verification process. Okay. All right. So you guys have read your immigration piece, or you're going to before Friday. You're going to do your workbook for Friday in class. You're going to act in a committee capacity. I also want to remind you that your thesis topic, essentially your thesis sentence, your topic for your policy, for your paper on how to save the world, the thing that you think is most important is due Friday night by midnight. It is a sentence. It is a sentence, right? If you think you know what you're going to write about, enter it now, and then you're done. Okay? And so we're going to give you some feedback on that to make sure that it's kind of narrow enough, right? Or that it is going in a direction. It's not just, as I said on Monday, the environment. That doesn't even make sense. How are you going to write about that? That's not an argument, okay? You'll get feedback within a week, I would guess, on your topic, okay? But they are also grading exams, so I might have to help out with that a little bit. That is that. You should have feedback pretty quickly. But again, you know, I would definitely get started. We're not going to make you change topics, probably, unless your born fellow has said, don't do these topics, and you choose that topic. So listen to what they have to say. Okay? All right. Let's get started.
I'm a New Yorker with long American roots. I see a land that's tilting, and I don't know what to do. Something is different, this danger feels new. Who do we look to? In the Capitol building, the chosen few. I wrote a song for you. I wrote a song for you. As you walk through Statuary Hall, did you hear the marble breathing? All the statues are trying to talk. What do you think that they're saying? The muse of history writes everything down. She writes just what she sees in Washington town. As you walk through Statuary Hall, you catch the marble moving. All the statues are trying to walk. Where do you think that they're going? We're on a bigger team than left or right. We have a flickering history as a guiding light. Don't want to see the American dream die in the night. Around the world in bars and parks, people commiserate. complex feelings round this flag of ours, but don't wanna see it fade. They still want their American friend. As you walk through the statuary hall, just see the marble moving. All the statues starting to walk. Where do you think that they're going? To find the man who would be king. Doesn't seem to care about anything. Now's the time to do something. Do we dare look away? Shut our eyes as we slide into the dark. Now's the time to do something. When we're old, looking back, we will cry when we see what we have done. Now's the time to say something. Families split up, the world heating up. Now's the time to say something. We are letting hate lead us away.
Okay, I thought we needed something a little more calming for us, but also at the same time, maybe to, remind us that it is important that we be active. And that was a song written for Congress. Hey, Congress, do your job, what they're saying. Work together, govern the people. This is one of the reasons why when we talk about Congress, there's some issues. This is through 2016. Congressional approval is a little bit higher right now than it was then. It's at around 26. But there's some real problems in terms of the way Congress is handling its job. As we can see, directly after 9/11, first of all, before 9/11, it was above 50%. The majority of the people thought that Congress was doing its job in the 1980s, and 1990s, and the 1960s, right? But it was right at around, it hit kind of a low point, close to 40, and then it's going to skyrocket. But then it's going to stay just above 50, and then it's going to drop precipitously. Between 2004 and 2020, the congressional approval has never gone above 50% again. That's 16 years where people have said, we don't think Congress is doing their job. And what's interesting about that is this. People don't think Congress is doing their job, but they don't vote out the representatives that are in office. We like our representatives, but we hate Congress. And there's some reasons for that, okay? We like our representatives because they show up all the time and we see their face. And because we know what their name is, we think we know them. We think we know what they're doing. We feel comfortable with them, whether it's true or not. They also tend to have better communication with their constituents. They can use the frank, which means for free, they can send a letter to every one of their constituents every day if they wanted to. There's more of a personal bond. We feel like that person is from where we're from, so they know about us. And they have high visibility. They show up on our local news all the time. They advertise, they credit claim, and they position. In other words, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but anytime they do something that their district would like, they advertise it. Anytime something happens that is good for their district, they claim credit for it, whether it's true or not. So, for example, when we talk about things like military bases in Oklahoma, the members of Congress who represent districts where military bases are constantly claiming credit for all the things that come to military bases. They're claiming credit for what things are in those military bases, et cetera, et cetera. But in fact, they have virtually no control over it. There is a bipartisan, or actually it's not even bipartisan, it's just nonpartisan organizing that determines what the base distribution is. So for example, whenever a base doesn't get closed down, a member of Congress may claim, hey, that's because I did all this stuff. Nah, they just got lucky, but they claim credit for it. They also take positions that they know are popular with their constituents, as long as they stay in line with what they want. So for example, in Oklahoma, Oklahoma voted for Medicaid expansion. The majority of people in Oklahoma wanted Medicaid expansion. Every single member of our congressional delegation voted against it. Every single one voted against with the exception of Kinder Horn, who was not in office at the time, voted against this being put into place. Okay, the governor of Oklahoma voted against that. The state legislature, the majority of them voted against Medicaid expansion. So when they come home and they're running for office, they don't talk about that. They don't talk about Medicaid expansion. They talk about things with which the majority of their constituents agree, and only those things. They position themselves in places that are popular, only those places. We hate Congress because we expect them to have answers to our nation's problems, and they're failing on that. We also expect them to have an open and fair policy process, and it's complicated. We talked about the hierarchy, we talked about the way that it was organized. That has a big impact on it. We also expect it to be effective. In the last 20 years, Congress has increasingly passed less legislation. Effectively, been able to pass it and have it signed by the president. Part of that is that it's split, right? Is that there's a Democratic House and a Republican president, or a Republican Senate and a Democratic president. That's part of it. But we don't see it as effective. And so we don't like that. We also can't bond with them. It's an institution. It's not a face. I say this as a person who's a congressional scholar. I love Congress. I absolutely love it. I was an intern there right after I graduated from college. I know what Congress feels like when you're walking through the halls. I love the institution. Political scientists like me, we love it. We think it's great. But we're political scientists. And not everyone agrees with us, because not everyone has that same sort of bond with this institution. We also hate Congress for another reason, and it's not here on this list. So I want you guys to be sure to take a note of this, okay? And we're going to talk more about it later, but I'm just going to tell you about it now. We hate Congress because members of Congress run against the institution. For example, and I think I talked to you about this with ads, right? That Jim Inhofe ad that I think is the most perfect political ad ever. Jim Inhofe has been in a senator or in the US Congress, one of the two, for more than 40 years. But he behaves as though he's never left the state of Oklahoma. He says, oh, all those other people, they're the problem. And we listen to that because every single representative does that. Oh, well, I'm working for you. It's all those other people. I have to work against them. And so they push it off. They run for Congress by running against the institution. And we'll talk about that again in just a second. So how do members make their decisions? This is the member, the representative. They listen to interest groups. They listen to colleagues that they trust. They listen to their party a lot. They listen to the different caucuses. So for example, if they're in the Freedom Caucus, they're going to pay more attention to the Freedom Caucus than they are to the Republican Party. They listen to their staff. They expect they hire their staff because they are ideologically similar to them, and they expect their staff to do the research and give them good advice. And then on salient issues, they listen to constituents. This is our word of the day, by the way, salient. All right. So what does salient mean? Any ideas? What does salient mean? Anyone?
Most important.
Almost. Okay. Salty, sure. Sort of, but not exactly. It's like this. If I asked you guys to tell me how many of you have, and usually I'm in a classroom so I can see you, but if you'll like do the little raise your hand symbol or something like that, because I think you can do that with this. You'll do the raise your hand symbol. I'm going to ask you, how many of you have an opinion about abortion? Raise your hand. People are still raising their hands. People are still saying yes and me. This is a salient issue. Not only do you know what I'm talking about, but you have an opinion about it, okay? And you think it's important, right? That kind of adds to it.
Mommy.
Hold on one second. Hey, can you go outside, Bubby?
What?
You want to sit here?
No.
Okay. So, let me ask you another question. You guys ready? Put your hands down. Now, I have a question. How many of you have an opinion about trade with Thailand? Maybe 4 of you so far? Maybe 4? This is not a salient issue. Members of Congress do not listen to you about issues like this. They do not listen to their constituents about issues like this. They listen to constituents whenever it is something that everyone in their district has an opinion on. Okay? And going back to that position taking, it's something they agree with. Okay? So, abortion, if they agree with the majority of their constituents, they're going to listen to their constituents. Trade with Thailand, even if the majority of their constituents may be given information and make a decision about trade with Thailand, they're not going to have that information. And so they're not going to listen to constituents who say, hey, look, I think it's really important, or I think we should do this with trade with Thailand. They're not going to listen. It's not a salient issue. So, Eric, will you take roll really quickly? And I'm going to make sure this door is closed.
Attendance is live. And if yours is not working, let me know before it closes.
Okay. So, I think that attendance is almost taken completely now. So let's talk a little bit about how individual members represent. They're going to represent through legislation, through service to Congress, right? They serve on committees, they serve in the leadership, and then they're also going to represent by constituency activity. And there's 3 different ways of representing in that way. So for example, I might author some legislation that is beneficial to my district. I represent the city of Norman, right? And in representing the city of Norman, I recognize that there is a college there. And so I'm going to pass some legislation that is beneficial to the university, right? So I write this legislation and I get it through the process. I shepherd it through the process and I get it passed. That's representation. I might also serve my district by doing this, okay? I might serve my district by serving on a committee for education. And by serving on a committee for education, then maybe even though I'm not writing legislation, I'm making amendments and I'm voting on things that would benefit my district, okay? So I'm serving in that way. Or I'm in the leadership, and so I'm helping get things through, okay? The third way is constituency activity. And so that means that maybe I don't necessarily write legislation, I don't serve on an education committee, but I have a liaison at the University of Oklahoma. And that liaison helps facilitate any problems people are having with federal grants, or problems maybe that they're having with getting registered to vote, or visas, or anything like that. That sort of constituency activity is more face-to-face. And so these are three different ways that individual members might represent. So when we talk about this representation and we think about how members think about who their district is, whenever I said I represent Norman and then I immediately went to the University of Oklahoma, it's pretty clear to me that as a representative, I would see them as my personal circle, right? I am a professor at the university, but you know, if I ran for office, I would have been a professor, right, at the university. And so I feel connected for that reason. And so they're my personal constituency, the University of Oklahoma. Now my constituency is broader. If I'm Tom Cole, if I'm in Tom Cole's seat, for example, then while the university is in my constituency, it's not all of it, right? There's also Tinker Air Force Base. There's also Fort Sill. There's also a lot of farmland. There's also some industrial areas, things like that. There's people who don't have anything to do with the University of Oklahoma. But if I'm in that seat, it may be that for me, my personal constituency is that thing that I think of first whenever I think of my district, the University of Oklahoma. So it's personal. And members of Congress are going to represent the interests of their constituencies in descending order. In other words, I'm going to start with the University of Oklahoma. They're who I think of first. They're who I write legislation for first. They're who I do service for first. All of those things. When I describe my district, I start with the University of Oklahoma. And then I start thinking about my primary constituency. And my primary constituency are those people that I need to vote for me in the primary, whether it's Democratic or Republican, in the primary in order to get the nomination. And so who are those people? Who make up those people? Well, you know, there's an industrial area and some unions. There are some farmers that I'm concerned about. And then there is the military bases, which also have my concern, right? So that's my primary group, right? And so I'm going to represent them as well, but I'm not going to think about them first. And then third, my re-election constituency. So not just the people in my party, but the independents, people from the other party that I can still get to vote for me. Who are they? Maybe small shop owners, maybe lawyers. As an attorney, you know, I reach out to the bar pretty regularly. And so that is a broader circle. People who generally are identify in this way or that way. My re-election. And I'm going to think about them third. And then I'm going to skip, and this is really important. Let's say my re-election constituency is literally 50.1%. That's how much of the vote I get. Then I'm going to think about all three of those really hard. But after that, I'm going to only think about my district, the other 49%, in terms of how many lakes I have, you know, how many cities there are, what the highways look like. I might talk about distinguishing features rather than the people. And I'm going to represent that in that way. Members of Congress are going to represent their actions as a member the same way to each group. So for example, if I was at the University of Oklahoma and they said, why did you vote on that water bill? It was really bad for us. I will say, I voted on that water bill because of these 7 reasons. I saw it as being good for this as a whole. I saw that it was important that the water be clean. I thought that it was important that we pay those taxes now in order to, or use our taxes in that way to ensure a water supply for the future. And then when I'm asked that at like a big meeting, a rally, or, you know, I'm out at Meet the People at the state fair and someone says, I would never vote for you. You voted this way on the water bill. Why would you ever vote that way? I would say the same exact things. So understand that I'm being honest. I'm being truthful. I'm still representing my actions in the same way. But I'm actually not really thinking about that person who says, I would never vote for you. Make sense? Now, the other thing that he discovered was something I already discussed, and I just want to remind you, okay? Members of Congress run for Congress by running against the institution. They've done this since the mid-1970s, and it's taken a toll on Congress. The people's view of Congress went from about 80% in the late 60s to where it is now in terms of approval. You know, in the teens, usually. That has to do with the fact that people who are in Congress are behaving as though the institution itself is evil, and they're representing that to their people. So they're, in other words, they're educating through their campaign that Congress is not to be trusted. This is dangerous. Okay, so I have a quick poll for you, and I think I had a question, so I'll come back to that in just a second. Let me ask this poll really quickly. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Okay, so this is live, and I'm asking you, how should an elected official represent? What do you want your member of Congress to be? A trustee? This means, for example, if you elected me, maybe you're electing me because you're like, hey, look, she's a political scientist. She has, oh, it's activated now. She's a political scientist. She has, you know, taught Congress. She knows about Congress. And she seems to know a lot about how legislation is made. She's connected here. I'm going to trust her because she's lived here long enough to do what is best for us, using her judgment because she's educated in these things. That's a trustee. A delegate, on the other hand, is someone who is a representative who votes the way their constituents want them to, even if it's bad for them, no matter what. Okay? So a delegate is going to, if you're electing me to be a delegate, then you are asking me, right, to always take an opinion poll every single time I'm going in on an agriculture bill, or I'm going in on a finance bill. You're going to take a public opinion poll and do what the people say. A politico is a little bit different. Politicos use their own judgment most of the time. But if an issue is really salient, if it really matters to their people, then they follow what their people ask them to do. So trustee, delegate, or politico. You have about 45 seconds left in the poll. And it looks like we got about 150 of you so far. Now this is trustee, delegate, and politico. This is how an individual member, so this is how I would represent if you were electing me to represent this district. Trustee, delegate, or politico. What is it you want me to do? Okay. There's about 10 seconds left. We didn't get quite everyone yet. We get a lot of trustees over here in the comments though. And it looks like 40% are going to say trustee, 34% are going to say delegate, and 26% are going to say politico. So people have different views on what a representative should be. That also plays into it, right? So if it's kind of a third, a third, a third, you know, then maybe you don't think Congress is doing their job because they're not doing the thing that you want best out of that. But that's an individual member, an individual member. There's another way that Congress represents. Congress represents as a whole, the institution of Congress, the House and the Senate. They represent as a whole. And there are two different ways they can do that. Through descriptive representation. And what this means is that the legislative body as a whole mirrors the makeup of the population. When we talk about descriptive representation, we're talking about politically relevant characteristics. What do I mean by that? What are some of my politically relevant characteristics? What would you say? If you're thinking about things that you're going to use to describe me, and I was running for office and it would make a difference. What's a politically relevant, descriptive characteristic of me? Anything? Okay, awesome, sure. Nobody wrote that, but I'm just pretending that you were going to. Knowledgeable, all right, great. Professor, lawyer, professor, informed, assertive when appropriate. Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Dylan, I appreciate that. All right, but there are other things too. So if you were just to say, my professor is, what am I? Oh, nice, thanks, appreciate that. Smart, I also appreciate that. Okay, I'm really not looking for compliments, I promise. All right, so let's give you where I'm going, okay? I'm a woman, right? Does that matter in politics? Yeah, it's a politically relevant characteristic. Being female or being male are politically relevant characteristics. So starting with that, what else can you say about me? I am a wife, that is true. Okay, what else? I'm white, that's true. Okay. I'm a mom, sure. Not your region, state of residence when we're talking about congressional representation, because you have to live there, okay? But yeah, middle class, yeah, sure, absolutely. So we're talking about my class, we're talking about the fact that I'm educated, right? All those things. I'm white, I'm a woman, okay? What my religion is, excellent, okay? So that would be something that would come up, all right? So all of those things are descriptive representation aspects, okay? Also things like, you know, I'm a wife and I'm a mom. I have a husband, which means I'm straight, right? That's a politically relevant characteristic, okay? Or, you know, at least in doesn't matter. The point is, substantive representation, okay? Substantive representation is the other way. The other way. Able-bodied, okay, perfect. Okay, that's another one. It's also politically relevant. Okay, I can walk and use my arms, and you guys don't get to see me do that very much, but you know, I have hands and I can type and stuff like that. Okay, substantive representation. The majority of policies, the majority of the time, reflect the desires of the population. So this is different. Okay, and we're gonna get back to descriptive in just a second, because when we're talking about me individually, descriptively. Oh, we also forgot my age. It also matters, right? I'm an old woman. okay? And so in terms of descriptively representing you guys, there are some ways that I represent you. Maybe some of you say, oh, well, descriptively, I'm white. Therefore, I feel like she descriptively represents me. Or descriptively, I'm a woman, so I feel like she represents me. Or descriptively, I am college educated, so I feel like she represents me. Middle class, so she represents me. My religion is the same as hers, which I haven't named, so you know or you don't know. So she represents me. All of those sort of things, right? And so you might feel that connection to me. But not all of you certainly can't find all of those connections. None of you are exactly like me. Now, there are people out there that are. But whenever we're talking about a mirror of the population, I can't descriptively represent a district. The district doesn't descriptively look like me, right? I mean, I could do it in different ways. And if the majority of my district were college educated and I'm college educated and that's what we're going with, okay. The majority of my district were white and I was white, okay. Majority were women, okay, right? But I can't descriptively represent the whole district, and I can't descriptively represent the United States, right? I mean, I'm way above the median age, okay? So substantive representation is different. This is when Congress as a whole, the majority of policies, the majority of the time, reflect the desires of the population. Pitkin in 1968, studying Congress, studying their policies, found this to be true. The majority of the time in 1968, the majority of the policies passed by Congress reflected the desires of the majority of the population. That's significant. Descriptive versus substantive representation, okay? So Pitkin says, hey, we don't have to have descriptive representation because it wasn't descriptive. It was all old, white, rich men. All of it, okay, in 1968. But she said it's okay because Congress is representing substantively. But we've had some things change. First of all, is it representing substantively? From 1990 to 2012, they looked at those particular years and they published this. This is an example of a peer-reviewed paper, okay? That means political scientists like me read their data and said, this is wonky, or this is good. This is the method you use. It's scientific. It's well done, okay? What they found instead was that Congress wasn't representing what the majority of the people wanted the majority of the time. They were representing wealthy and corporate interests the majority of the time between 1990 and 2012. This is one of the reasons people get very dissatisfied with Congress. And so they start looking more toward descriptive representation. We do know that members of Congress are more likely to be male, older, better educated, white, and rich. More likely, but not entirely. Pitkin in 1968 said it doesn't matter because they're representing what the people want. But political scientists today say it does matter whenever it comes to things like agenda setting. So for example, there was a female representative from Nevada, and she's elected in 1972. And I want to tell you what her path is to election. She was a widow and a rancher, and she owned thousands of acres in Nevada. And the ranch next to her became available, and as many people are, she was property rich or asset rich and cash poor. And so she went to the bank and she asked for a loan. And they looked at all of the things that she had. They looked at the profits that she was making on her ranch. And they said, yeah, this looks really good. You know, we'd love to give you the loan. Your husband needs to sign. And she said, I own the land. And they said, well, your husband needs to sign. And she said, my husband is dead. I'm a widow. And they said, okay, do you have a brother or a father who can sign for you. She owned the land. It was her business. And a bank would not give her a loan because she was female. 1972. So she ran for office. She got elected. And she got appointed to the finance committee. And the first thing she did was she wrote a piece of legislation that disallowed discrimination in lending by banks on the basis of sex, color, ethnicity, etc. And it passed easily through Congress. And you say, well, see, it passed easily through Congress. Yes, it did. But no one had ever written that before. And so I want to talk to you about something that I think is really important. And this goes to the paper that you're about to write, okay? She sponsored that bill because it was a problem she saw. The thing about descriptive representation, and the thing that I want you to take from this class is this. You can only solve the problems you see. Members of that banking or finance committee had no idea there was this discrimination because they had never faced it. Understand that you may come to me with a problem and I say, oh, I never thought of it that way. Because I can't have all your experiences. I can only have mine. When you think somebody else will solve it, understand that maybe no one else is seeing it. You can only solve the problems you see. And so descriptive representation means that there is agenda setting through bill sponsorship and amendment and committee activity that brings more problems of the population that other people weren't aware of to the forefront. The second thing it does is this. If I look at Congress and nobody looks like me, if I look at the governor's office and nobody has ever looked like me, then why should I ever believe that I am connected to the government? So that's our second word for the day, efficacy. This is a political science term because if you look it up otherwise, it doesn't mean the same thing, all right? Efficacy of the public is how connected we, the people, feel to our government. Are we a part of it? Is it us? Because it should be. This is a democracy. The level of connection that we have to our government, the efficacy of the public, really matters. Now, it's almost time to go. I taught you 2 words today, salience and efficacy. I've given you an admonition to solve the problems you see. And I'm just going to give you, this is the last Congress. There are half the population are women. Less than a quarter of the House and Senate are women. This comes a little bit closer. The amount of African Americans in the House are equal proportionally to about the population. Hispanics are way underserved. Native Americans aren't even on here. They're underserved a bit as well. The LGBTQ members, there are 2 senators, and LGBTQ members make up about, or people make up about 10% of the population. So that's 2% to 10%. Only 8 members of the House. Half of them were elected in 2018. Understand that if I was showing you this 2 years ago, just before the election, then it would be 1 and 4. Okay? Members of Congress have important goals, and House incumbents win over 90% of the time. And they win more than 60% of the vote. Now, if it's one of those races where they just got in, Kendra Horn, for example, then sometimes there's a correction because the population is more energized during a presidential race. Incumbency increases the chance of re-election. And we've talked about this, advertising, credit claiming, position taking. But they also outspend challengers 12 to 1. And they're helped because the legislature, the state legislature, after this year, is going to redraw the districts to make sure they never lose. Incumbency increases the chance of re-election. All right, I know it's time to go. If you guys have questions, I'm here for a second. Boomer!
Sooner.
Sooner.
Oh, look.